Welcome to Exceptional Journeys, an enriching podcast tailored for families and caregivers of neurodivergent individuals.
I'm Georgia Mueller.
I'm Nicole Schroeder.
And I'm Karen Tennyson.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Exceptional Journeys podcast. We are glad to have you here on this episode. I am one of your hosts, Nicole Schroeder. I am a board-certified behavior analyst, as well as a private family consultant. And today we are going to be piggybacking off of what our last episode talked about. We talked about why to get a diagnosis, why explore that diagnostic evaluation, and some of the challenges that might come with that as well. So today we're kind of taking that next step in your journey. So you go and you get a diagnostic evaluation, and then there is a confirmed diagnosis. At the end of your report, you're going to see all these different recommended therapies. This is going to vary by child, of course, as well. But today we want to do just kind of a basic overview of some of those common therapies that you may see listed on that diagnostic evaluation for services that your child might need. So today we're just going to do a brief overview of some of these, and in future episodes we'll be doing a little bit more of a deep dive. So the first kind of therapy that we're going to be talking about today is occupational therapy. So I'm going to hand this off to our other host, Karen Tennyson.
I'm Karen Tennyson, BCBA. I am going to talk a little bit about occupational therapy. Occupational therapy really works on promoting independence and participation in meaningful activities. You know, those functional living skills, so to speak. Self-care, productivity, kind of what you do in your leisure. A lot of these therapies really go along together. A lot of people who do get occupational therapy may be getting another therapy such as speech language pathology, which is they really work on communication, treating communication disorders, speech production, language comprehension and expression, social communication, voice levels, and fluency. So this helps with finding the communication that works best for the individual. So for instance, somebody who's younger may need some kind of a picture exchange system. You know, they have little pictures that are in a notebook and then they hand what they need. That's a form of speech. You might have some people that use devices, you know, like a tablet where there's a program that they can ask for things that they want and they need. There's a lot of that kind of training goes into speech language pathology, really working on any of those kind of communicative disorders. That, along with the occupational therapy, I think really works well as serving the person as a whole. You're looking at their communication with speech and language pathology, but then in occupational therapy, you're looking more at like their physical capabilities of being able to care for themselves and live that meaningful life.
All right, thanks for kind of that intro to OT and speech language pathology as well. So again, speech and language pathology really focusing on those communication disorders and challenges, and OT really focusing on improving the functional abilities and somebody's ability to participate in daily life. The next one I want to briefly talk about is physical therapy. So this one may be a little bit more common to see across the board if maybe you've broken a bone or had an injury. Similar with pediatric physical therapy, we may be working on a child's movement, their strength, their coordination, their balance. In young children, this is all often going to look like play-based activities, getting kids to engage in, fun games or things that they find enjoyable. And little do they know, they're working on their fine motor skills, which is with our little muscles like our fingers, or they're working on their gross motor skills with our big muscles, our leg muscles, our arm muscles. You may see kids, that have some braces or different walking devices, etc. All of those types of, challenges are going to be worked on through interventions through physical therapy. Mm-hmm. So physical therapy focusing a little bit more on the actual building of your body. So another type of therapy, again, so we've covered occupational therapy, we've covered speech and language pathology, and then also physical therapy. I also want to focus on some of the mental sides of therapy that may be beneficial for potentially a child or individual who's diagnosed, but also the mental health standpoint for families or parents. Georgia, would you like to expand on kind of that psychology component?
Sure. So what we know is that people who can talk and have communication definitely need to have that experience. They need to talk with each other. And what I find is parents do not talk to other people about their needs as often as they should. And since that's what I do, I coach families. I coach families on the nitty-gritty details, but I typically end up also being a somewhat of a counselor as well, which is fine to an extent. It's really not my forte, I won't lie. I really want families to reach out to a counselor of some kind, though. Reach out to a formal counselor for yourself as a parent, first of all, because you've got to get your head around the situation before you can really help your child. And then the other thing is, of course, both parents need to be on the same page. So please do family counseling. If there are additional siblings involved that are at a communicative level, older or functionally speaking, definitely you want to get everybody involved in getting that counseling support. And then the family support groups go a long way to that as well, only not as formal. And family support groups frequently are in the mode of moving forward and problem solving together, and they really don't actually want to be an emotional sounding board for other families as often as you might think they would. A little bit goes a long way on that. So don't burn out your welcome. Go get some formal counseling for yourself. You deserve that. Now, people also ask me frequently, should my individual who has the disability be receiving counseling as well? And I'm actually going to say not necessarily. It depends on that person. Depends very much on their ability to communicate already. It depends on how effective that communication is for them, because if they're just hearing what other people are saying to them about them rather than participating two-way in that conversation, we could actually be causing damage. We could be creating extra onion layers that we really don't want to do. So really think carefully about whether or not your individual is going to benefit from counseling, or if you want to dig into the other therapies that Nicole and Karen already discussed. And then maybe verbal counseling comes later down the road. And there's a wide variety of verbal-based counseling that may or may not be effective for, say, a person with high-functioning autism. It's not always an automatic. The other thing I'm going to caution about that, to be honest, is it's kind of easy to go down one path and never realize there's a parallel universe. So if you walk in the door of psychological therapy for your individual with a disability, but you didn't already learn about the other therapies that have already been discussed, you may be missing out on a considerable amount of effective, helpful therapy and not necessarily seeing progress with psychological-based counseling if they're not ready for it.
Right.
Which oftentimes they're not. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, Georgia. Next I kind of want to go into the topic of social skills groups. These could occur in a variety of settings, and even in tandem with some of the therapies that we've already spoke about. Many places that offer these therapies we were speaking about may also, in addition, offer social skills group in a formal setting. There's also lots of social skills groups that are kind of in informal settings as well. So, Karen, would you kind of share with us some brief introductions to what are social skills groups?
Everybody works with struggling with social skills on some level. Our guys that are neurodivergent may have more challenges with communication and social skills than their peers. So, we know that social skills are essential life skills. That's how we communicate with other people, how we get what we want. This is a very important thing. But a lot of times, people that we work with and need assistance in kind of understanding appropriate body language, understanding other people's body language, being able to express emotions, initiating and responding to interactions with peers, those taking turns skills, gaining self-control, anger management, accepting consequences. It's really hard to lose, but we have to learn how to lose. And being able to cope with things like being teased and bullied, being able to advocate for yourself. That's really important. These are all social skills that we have learned over time it's really important to make sure that people have the opportunity to grow those skills. Typically, we see kind of children and adolescents, these groups kind of focus on 5 to 18 years old age span. And like Nicole had said, there's social skills in a lot of different environments. A school environment where, maybe it's a group playing a game and they need to learn how to take turns, how to share, how to say good job at the end of it, things along those lines. But social groups could be small, about 3 to 8 kids, and you really want them, the more opportunities to meet, the better. This is a lot about consistency and being given opportunities.
Awesome. So kind of, going off of that, one setting that we also see the social skills groups occur in quite frequently is applied behavioral analysis, or ABA. I get asked all the time, what's ABA, when they see it on a report. ABA is a therapy that you may see most commonly if you have a diagnosis given of autism spectrum disorder, but it can be used with a variety of ages and a variety of challenges and disabilities. So in kind of a simple way of stating what ABA is, it's the way of understanding how our behavior works and using that understanding to help learn new skills and modify behavior in meaningful ways. It's like figuring out why someone does what they do, mm-hmm. and then finding a new way to teach them ways of, engaging, ways of behaving that are helpful for them and are positive. It's often used for teaching a wide variety of skills, like communication, play skills, daily living skills, interacting with others. But as I stated before, it can be used for a wide variety of goals and, addressing different challenges. I will say one thing that might kind of differ from some of these other disciplines that we've talked about is ABA is kind of, I think we can consider it a gold standard at this point for working on maladaptive behaviors. When it comes to, and when I say maladaptive, I mean some behaviors that are challenging. Right. If your child, whether they're 3 or 17, is displaying behaviors like aggression, maybe some self-injury, property destruction, excessive screaming, crying, etc., ABA is often the most common way to kind of address some of those challenging behaviors and look at effectively decreasing those behaviors.
And ABA stands for Applied Behavior Analysis. And my position, I said earlier, is a BCBA, which is a board certified behavior analyst. And we utilize applied behavior analysis as our procedure, as our way that we work with clients. There is a lot of controversy. There's some people who like it, some people who don't. That's something we're going to get into in a future episode. But when we talk about ABA, we really talk about ABA in the sense that we have consent from the client, that we are working with the client, not against the client. So when we talk about ABA, we're not talking about a compliance-based. We're talking about meeting a person where they're at and building their skills and giving them that, skills for emotional regulation.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for adding that in. And as we're talking about these therapies, if you were to go and post on a public forum, how did your child respond to OT? How did they respond to SLP, ABA, etc.? You're going to get a wide variety of answers and opinions. So I think, even just bringing up just the fact that each of these therapies does something different, and each of these therapies is meant to be individualized. And so not all of these therapies are going to be needed for every child that has a diagnosis. This is why you're looking at your diagnostic evaluation and what was specifically recommended. If ABA was not recommended for your child, then if that's something you're wanting to explore, then you probably need to have a conversation with that diagnostician. Same if OT is not, etc. All of these therapies are not meant for everybody, nor if you try to put your child in all of these all at once, we're going to find some more barriers as well, right? So just something to keep in mind. Today we're just kind of giving you a brief overview of some of these services. So in talking about these services, I also want to briefly touch on where do they happen. So we've kind of given you this is the basics of what they do, but where can these services happen at? How do I get them? Where are they at? So I'm going to have Georgia briefly touch on kind of the settings of where some of these different therapies can take place.
Sure. I want to comment a little bit on the end of that last part of the conversation too. I can't agree more. You can't put your kiddo in all these different therapies and try to figure out what's working and what's not working.
Well, it's exhausting.
Oh, totally. It'll drive the parent crazy. You'll go broke, and you won't be able to see the results because it's like spaghetti. Right?
And let's not talk about if they're also in school full time already. Then we've got a whole other.
Yeah. And you've got
these our kid has no life.
Around.
We're talking about children.
Yeah, right. So one at a time. The other, it's just like taking a new medication. You don't take 5 new medications at one time. The other thing that's important here, I think, is that not every therapy is right for your child, or maybe it's just not right now.
Yeah.
Or maybe the therapist doesn't understand your child the way they need to be understood. None of those things is wrong. You absolutely have permission to seek new therapists, wait to do something, etc. And if you want to help, if you want to figure out how to prioritize that, you talk to somebody who is a therapist or somebody who is not a therapist. Talk to other families, but don't be afraid to try anything because you heard a bad report about one different therapy or another, because it may just not have been right for that person's child.
Absolutely.
Right. So, settings. These are important. Most of the time when we have our little bitty kids that are getting diagnosed, hopefully getting before the age of 3, then we're utilizing our in-home support through First Steps in most cases. First Steps is almost entirely home-based. That's on purpose because they want to teach you. First Steps is not just show up, do the therapy with your kiddo, and run away. You need to learn from that therapist on the floor with your kid, or it doesn't matter because the number of hours they're coming to your house are minimal and they're not going to make a difference. You become the implementer, but you need to be there to do that. So in-home is crucial. In their own context is always preferred if possible. There are times though when that's not going to work, and there may be times when your therapist says, you know what, I can't get the best from your kiddo in this environment where he already rules the roost. He already knows what's going on. He's in full control of this environment. And I need to neutralize his settings so he can get a grip and start to make progress. You're not going to see that progress if there's too much chaos going on around the therapy situation. So don't be afraid to try it clinic-based. Clinic-based is terrific. Another way to do that is sometimes if your kiddo's in a private therapy setting, different, like maybe they're at your church child care setting or something like that. a lot of them will let you push in. They'll let a private therapist come in and do that in context with your child amongst their peers. And that gives them a new training opportunity because they can pull the peers in to make that therapy as lifelike as possible and integrated as possible. And I love that. There are also private preschools that are therapeutic, which is going to be sort of like a full day clinic kind of setting. I've spent a lot of time in one of those recently, and I think it's wonderful. They've got all therapies on property. They've got typical kids these kiddos are mixed in with the typical kids. They've got teachers who are extremely well aware of all the therapeutic practices and try to do some implementation of those within the class as a whole. So I'm really a fan of therapeutic settings, and we were able to actually win a therapeutic setting, ABA immersed setting for my son when he was 4, where he stayed for 6 years. And nothing fixes him, by the way. Don't try to fix your kid this way. That doesn't work. But his life is so much better than if he had not had that opportunity. Other things that are important, I think, is remember that they can also, after the age of 3, your school district is responsible to provide these services in an early childhood setting, which is going to look a lot like their preschool probably, but a bit more structured and a little bit more like the therapeutic, in that there might be multiple therapists on property, and then your teachers who are also more aware of those kinds of modalities to use in their classroom. And then as they get older, you may go for, you may choose homeschool at some point, especially my families who have kids that end up having dual diagnoses where they've got a mental health diagnosis in conjunction with their autism, for example, and they are starting to become more aware of themselves, they're becoming more verbal, and they're becoming more emotionally reactive because they're starting to learn about the world. And sometimes the school setting is really overwhelming for those students, and they need to neutralize again. So they need to come back home and start learning from home. And then maybe they go back to the public school at some point. Or maybe they graduate early and go on to college because they're super duper kids. So you just never know.
Well, and depending on the level of the public schools, resources and supports, that's, a good way to go. If the person is medically fragile, then maybe that would be a better option to do homeschooling, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And then there's also community-based. So you can always take any of these modalities we're talking about and find a way to use them in context. How do they work at the zoo, at the park? How do they work at Walmart? I'm just going to be honest with you. We all got to go to the grocery store. Take a therapist to the grocery store with you and see what happens.
That's right.
You never know. It's it's just an opportunity to just build that into your regular everyday activities. And I always say, well, where should we do therapy? Well, where do my kids' peers hang out? Where do the kids his age spend their time? That's where you should be too. Why not? And that's all I have on settings at this point. Yeah.
Well, I think as far as, settings go, and as far as different services, that we've talked about, what works for others or what doesn't work for others doesn't really necessarily say that that's going to work or not work for yourself, right? So kind of finding those little pieces, does my child struggle with, kind of those speed, language, articulation kind of things? Maybe we need an SLP, but are they at the point where they can be in a public school because of behavior? So maybe we homeschool, so maybe the SLP comes home. So many different options. You can kind of create this for yourself. What does my child need? What do I need that can make this work?
And in the most ideal settings, if your child is receiving one or more of these services, collaboration, which I'm sure we could have a whole episode
Absolutely.
on how to make this possible of these different disciplines, collaborating, or schools and therapies, outside therapies, etc. But if you have a quality therapist in any of these settings, there should be collaboration happening, not only with you as the family members, but also with your school, with your other therapies. And that is truly the key, how to how we get the most effective skills, achieved with our kids. So thank you for joining us today as we talked about the different disciplines and some of the settings that, these can occur in. And we look forward to seeing you next time on Exceptional Journeys, where we will do an intro to the fun topic of insurance and navigating some funding for these services. Thanks for joining us.